I remember the exact clink of the crystal glass right before I did it. It sounded like someone snapping the last thread on a kite. My mother, Linda, had her hand on my father Robert's elbow, eyes sparkling the way they only do when they're proud of the son they picked, the son they told everyone was the one who would make it. Tyler, button, navy suit, hair done like he had just walked out of a men's magazine, was up on the little stage, smiling so wide it looked like his jaw might fall off. The whole banquet hall in downtown Chicago smelled like cheap roses and burnt coffee, with the faint echo of a string quartet trying very hard to sound important. I sat at the back, because that's where they always put me. Oh, Grace can just sit with the cousins. I wore a dress that didn't scream for attention, but also didn't make me invisible. My purse sat on my lap like a quiet conspirator. I watched as Tyler accepted an award for leadership and vision at the family company's gala, an award they'd been building him up for since he was 18 and barely knew how to show up on time. He raised his glass. My mother swooned. My father wiped his eyes like this was a movie they'd always wanted to star in. The crowd hollered. Someone shouted, "Future mayor," as if we were living in a small-town rom-com. I waited until they were mid-toast. My cheeks hurt from smiling. I remember thinking, not for the first time, that life was spectacularly unfair and also oddly a lot like one of those slow-cook petty revenge stews. Needs time, low heat, and the right ingredients. Then, when the applause hit its peak, I stood up. I moved slowly enough that no one would register it at first, like a tide drawing back before a wave. I had in my hand a single sheet of paper and a pen. I walked to the stage, and the music dropped. They all looked at me as if I were a mosquito nobody had noticed. My mother's smile evaporated in 3 seconds. My father's grip on Linda tightened. Tyler's expression folded from smug to curious to the kind of confusion you see on someone's face when they realize they don't own the plot twist. I stepped to the microphone. The room inhaled. I mouthed 3 words the way you do when you're about to push someone off a cliff and want to savor the view. And then I stopped. That pause, that was the cliffhanger. That's where I'll leave you for a second, because the good stuff, how I got there, why I did it, and how petty and delicious the aftertaste was, needs a little backstory. You ready? Of course you are. Who wouldn't be? People tend to tell stories about their childhood like it's a single movie reel. One scene, one mood. Mine was more like a long series of commercials for other people's favorites. My parents loved the idea of success. They loved the public parts of success. Trophies, speeches, the pretty photo op where their son's smile reflected well on their parenting. They loved Tyler because he made success look neat and tidy. He was loud at family dinners, charming when visitors came, and skilled at being the family's chosen headline. Me? I was quiet. I liked numbers and small victories. A pie that came out of the oven without splitting. An invoice that balanced. A client who called back because something I fixed worked. I got called too serious and practical, like those were sins. Grace will be fine, my mother would say with that tone that means you're already filed away in a drawer labeled good enough. Honestly, that line should have been printed on their holiday cards. Do you remember middle school where everyone decides who gets cast as the lead in every imaginary play? That was my house, but permanent. Tyler got the lead, the spotlight, the you'll thank us later boardroom pep talks. I got the whisper, the small nod, the internship 3 towns over because I wasn't ready for anything closer to home. He went to frat parties and came back with short-lived business ideas. My suggestions for learning bookkeeping were treated like jokes. Can you believe they once told me to marry ambition because I couldn't choose one? Yeah, real supportive. So I left. I left not in a dramatic movie way, no slammed door or vindictive Instagram post, just a suitcase and a one-way bus ticket to a college that didn't know my father's name. I worked 2 jobs, learned to write contracts without wanting to puke, and sat in night classes where everyone was too tired to pretend they were anything other than hungry for the next step. That was the kind of hunger you can't fake. It sticks to your teeth. I studied business because it seemed like the least romantic, most useful weapon I could carry home. I watched Tyler from afar on social media. Photos of meetings he probably didn't run. Selfies with handshakes he likely didn't earn. He was the public version of success. I liked the private work of actually doing it. And I saved. God, I saved like I'd been paid to hoard pennies. I didn't buy fancy clothes or expensive shoes to fool anyone into thinking I was important. I invested, flirted with spreadsheets, made small offers on stocks that turned into big ones with the patience of someone who had grown up with very slow-burning anger. Revenge, if you're doing it like a professional and not a teenager, is 9 parts patience, 1 part creativity, and a dash of theater. I wasn't looking for some viral moment where I threw cake at Tyler. That's public, messy, and boring. I wanted to be devious, petty. The kind of small surgical sting that leaves people shaken but unable to point at the tool that did it. Here's the plan I cooked up in the evenings between client calls and balancing ledgers. Learn the family business, not from a book, but from the ground up. I took a consulting job that required me to work with companies in the same industry as my parents'. I learned the jargon they used over dinner, the real margins, where companies hide value. I made friends with people Tyler waved at parties and treated like acquaintances. I bought breakfast for a few minority shareholders, literal coffee and a conversation, and listened. People who own tiny percentages of companies are like sleeping dragons. You poke them with kindness and maybe a little cash, and they wake up to a new idea. You want to know the funniest part? No conspiracy required. Most of the time, people behave exactly like their incentives. My parents had been passing influence and authority to Tyler because he was loud and easy, not because he had the chops. They trusted appearances, and appearances are cheap. So I quietly started buying shares, not with one big theatrical check, but in chunks, like you eat a chocolate bar, small bites over long nights. I incorporated a small holding company. I did outreach to investors. I found a retired board member who had a grudge about a decades-old management choice and offered to buy his small stake. I found an accountant who liked bourbon and made for a good ally. It was not pretty, but it was legal. It was also slow, satisfying, and delicious. Meanwhile, I built a consulting network that made our little industry take notice. I helped a competitor turn a stagnant division into a cash machine. I used the case studies to door knock with confidence. I spoke at industry breakfasts about sustainable growth and leadership that listens. Everyone nodded and took my cards because I smelled like competence. Tyler sent me a text once, "Congrats on the talk. Hope you're not trying to steal my job," winky face. The emoji was insulting. I smiled, saved the message, and moved on. Every small purchase, every ally, every paper signed was a stitch. Nobody noticed because background stitches don't show in photos. They notice at the gala when you walk in wearing a dress, hold an envelope, and the music drops. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because of the delicious anticipation. I had rehearsed the speech I didn't intend to make. I had contingency plans and lawyers on speed dial who had no idea their phones would be used for anything but billing. I had one more small, petty thing planned. Because what is revenge without the garnish? I bought the entire first run of the company's glossy annual newsletter that week and paid to have it printed and shipped. On the cover, a tasteful photograph of the headquarters with a headline that screamed nothing, simply the company name. Inside, there was a glossy spread of the future, new clients, new markets, pictures of hardworking employees. Nothing about Tyler. It was clean, elegant, and deliberately unremarkable. I had it delivered to the lobby of the building right before the gala, so guests would pick it up as swag. Why petty? Because Tyler had always loved the headlines. He framed his own press clippings like trophies. I knew he'd want to be on the cover. The gentle, almost mocking omission was my paper-thin, quiet slap. It would make him look for significance where none existed. Petty is art when done well. At the gala, people were clutching those newsletters like programs, proud to take home the official story. Tyler asked my father, "Did you see my mention?" He hadn't. My father mumbled something about being busy. His eyes darted to me and back. That's when I knew I had his attention. But the main event, the thing that would make the room tilt, wasn't the newsletter. That was the prelude. The main course was a paper I'd had drawn up and signed by a coalition of minority shareholders who'd warmed up to my steady phone calls and free lunches. I was the majority buyer now, or at least comfortably near it. I had the votes lined up for an emergency board meeting. And a board meeting is a clean thing. Minutes, signatures, no public meltdowns, only corporate facts. Yet the timing was everything. So, back to the microphone. The room was hot. The bouquets had already started to look wilting in the late night light. I looked at Tyler. He was smiling like a cartoon villain. And then at my mother, who had her hands clasped as if inhaling success might make it permanent. I smiled. The kind of smile people assume is shock before they realize it's a trap. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, voice steady. I told a joke about burnt coffee and bad string quartets. A few people laughed because what else do you do when the person with the mic is politely funny? Then I said the 3 words I had mouthed earlier. Board meeting adjourned. Silence like a thick curtain fell. "What?" someone shouted. My father's face was a shade of paper. Tyler looked like he'd just been told his favorite childhood toy had been recalled. I walked them through it. I explained, with this same calm I used to reconcile ledgers, that I had acquired a controlling interest. I explained that the board had met in an emergency session and that all decisions were final. I announced with the ceremonial flourish of someone reading the minutes of history that the company's leadership would be undergoing what I called strategic realignment. I didn't say the word fired because it's messy and leaves room for theatrics. I said leadership realignment instead, clean, merciless, corporate. Tyler's throat bobbed. Who gave you? He stammered. "You did," I said, "when you insisted on showing up and collecting the honors for work you didn't do, when you treated leadership like a photo op instead of a responsibility, when you convinced them you were the future because you smiled the loudest. You made it possible because you made people think appearances were all that mattered." There were murmurs. My mother stood as if caught in cold water. My father tried to speak and then stopped. The room had turned into that awkward space at the bottom of a joke where everyone realized they were the punchline. The follow-up was small and gloriously petty. That night I posted, calmly, legally, factually, the new board resolution on the company webpage and sent a polite email to clients announcing the strategic leadership transition. The internet, being the hungry beast it is, did what it does. People screenshot, people gossip, and rumors do the heavy lifting that headlines can't. The greatest part was not Tyler's loss of a title or the way he sat on a folding chair back in his parents' kitchen the next week, face looking like someone who'd been spooned lemon in the eye. It was how the town's water cooler conversation shifted. For years, my parents had been the ones leaning back, nodding at the right moments, proud of their chosen star. Now people looked at them like miscalibrated instruments.
Fine for reading the weather, but not good for forecasting storms. Petty garnish. The following Monday, I arranged for a tasteful billboard, budgeted with the company's already approved marketing funds because board control has perks, to go up on the main highway into town. It read in a tasteful serif, "Leadership is more than a smile," from the board. Tyler's face was the first thing people thought about when they drove by. My parents called it cruel. Others called it an efficient use of advertising dollars. Was I wrong? Maybe. Did it feel good? Like the first sip of revenge tea that's been brewed for years, scalding, necessary, and oddly warm. Aftermath was quieter than I wanted, and louder in other ways. Tyler moved to a different city a few months later. He took a job in sales for a different firm where he could be charming without consequence. My parents handled it the way people handle sudden weather, awkwardly, with too many comments about lessons and family. Thanksgiving that year was quiet. My mother folded napkins until her hands hurt. My father kept picking up the newspaper as if the next article might wind the clock back. People messaged me. Old neighbors who'd seen me as the quiet one sent words like proud and about time. Some cousins pretended nothing happened. Tyler sent one text that said, "We should talk." I never texted back. That's petty too, like a small, perfectly placed bandage that never needs to be pulled off. So, here's what I learned. And I'm not handing it as moral guidance, just truth. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to show up for the photos to own the story. Sometimes the most brutal things are also the most boring. Bank transfers, signatures, a calm conversation with a shareholder who's tired of being ignored. Those are the tools. They're legal, they're efficient, and they sting in a way that makes people rethink their entire rearview mirror. Was I wrong for letting it go that far? That's a question I ask sometimes at night when the house is quiet and the heater hums like a judge considering a sentence. I think about my mother's face in that ballroom when the music dropped. I think about Tyler on that stupid folding chair. I think about how I used to be the person they'd file away as practical. And then I smile, small and private. So tell me, what would you have done? Was I cruel or was I finally fair? Was my revenge petty but deserved? Or did I become the sorts of people I used to resent? Drop your thoughts. I want to read them.